house and has not been seen by anyone since. Protests and a demand for an investigation by defense counsel about how he could disappear from a United Nations guarded safe house was ignored. Now note, only the United States government can put an end to inquiries at the United Nations level. Also, records indicate Bismunga received a 30-year prison sentence after being arrested in Angola working with UNITA. That was Jonas Savimbi's group in Angola. Seth Singashonga, the former Rwandan Patriotic Front Minister of Interior, was assassinated by the Rwandan Patriotic Front death squad in Nairobi on May 16, 1998, after he announced he was going to testify at the International Criminal Court Tribunal for Rwanda. And he was going to testify that the witnesses provided by the Rwandan Patriotic Front to the tribunal were all forced to give false testimony by the Rwandan Patriotic Front government. Now, assassinations. 3 men, David Kiwanuka, Charles Muhaji, and Christopher Lubanga, were arrested by the Kenyan police. Kiwanuka was claimed to have been Rwandan, despite his typical Muganda name, while Muhaji and Lubanga were identified as Ugandan. The 3 had been identified in what Punir derides as a story obviously fed by rather untalented Kigali security operatives by Kenyan taxi driver Ali Abdul Nasser, who claimed that these 3 men had tried to hire him as a paid killer because Sindashonga had stolen $54 million in a criminal partnership with Kiwanuka's father, who the Nairobi police claimed to have been the director of immigration services in Kigali, and who had subsequently been supposedly killed by Sindashonga so he would not have to share the loot. This story ran into serious problems when the actual director of immigration services, a man named Charles Butera, surfaced to state that he was alive, that he had no son named Kiwanuka, that he knew Sindashonga only as a brief acquaintance, and that nobody had ever stolen $54 million. Despite the problems with the Kenyan criminal case, the 3 men remained in jail until the 31st of May of 2001. Now, these were the 3 men who were arrested for supposedly murdering Mr. Sindashonga, who was to testify against Rwandan leaders. Now, the 3 men remained in jail until May 31st of 2001, when they were released from jail by a court. In a December 2001 hearing, Sindashonga's widow, Siranki Nikuzi, claimed that the Rwandan government was behind the assassination and revealed that he had been scheduled to testify before the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and the French Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry. Sindashonga, who had agreed to testify for the defense of the trial of Obed Ruzindana, would have been the first current or former member of the Rwandan Patriotic Front to testify before the International Criminal Tribunal. Nikuzi claims that the Rwandan embassy official Alfonso Imbayire, who was the acting ambassador at that time, organized the assassination. Imbayire was recalled by his government in January of 2001. Immediately after Nikuzi's accusation and shortly before a new hearing was to begin, only to be shot dead by unidentified gunmen in a Kigali bar on February the 7th, 2001. So here you see a trail of assassinations and killings of people who are to testify or who have evidence that would indict certain leaders within the Rwandan government, including Paul Kagame. In December 2005, Juvenal Uwilling Iyumana, a Hutu and former Minister of Trade and Commerce, was found floating in a canal in Brussels, naked, with his hands cut off, after disappearing a few weeks earlier. He had been in contact with Stephen Rapp and 2 of his investigators, who were pressuring him to give false testimony for the prosecution at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, according to a letter he had sent to the president of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda prior to his disappearance. In the letter to the president of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and to Stephen Rapp, he said that Rapp's two Canadian investigators had threatened to kill him and cut his body in pieces unless he cooperated. He refused to do so and refused to meet with them again. Shortly after that letter was sent, he was murdered. Again, a demand by defense counsel for the suspension of Stephen Rapp and the two Canadian investigators pending an investigation into their possible involvement was ignored. Now, as a note, Canada's operatives are often stooges of the United States government. Also, H.E. Stephen Rapp, the United States ambassador at large for war crimes, certainly cannot be trusted. Now, one of the writers counsel to General Augustin Ndidi-Leyemana, chief of staff of the Gendarmerie of Rwanda in the military coup trial, was himself threatened in July of 2008 by a CIA officer working at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda that if he did not watch his step, he would be killed. This threat, echoing previous threats by the Rwandan Patriotic Front, was reported to the president of the tribunal, but he was disbelieved. Scottish lawyer Andrew McCartan, Scotland's foremost military lawyer, was killed in October of 2003 when his car went off a cliff in Scotland, just a few weeks after having told the same writer at a meeting in Toronto that he had tried to confront Bill Clinton about the United States role in Rwanda and that he had learned secrets about the United States involvement in Rwanda in 1994 and its control of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Scottish police could find no cause for the car crash, and the Scottish police did put out a bulletin for witnesses to that crash. Now, Mr. Andrew McCartan, who was killed in this car crash, he was also once a photographer on American bombers that bombed Indochina and bombed in Vietnam. In her memoirs, the former chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, Carla Del Ponte, reported that Paul Kagame torpedoed the investigation of crimes committed by the Rwandan Patriotic Front, and that the United States government also put pressure on her to leave Kagame alone, and when she refused to sign a document to that effect, she was soon replaced. To no one's surprise, the new prosecutor, Hassan Jallow, immediately lost interest in the Rwandan Patriotic Front and Paul Kagame. In 2010, American Defense Counsel Peter Erlander was arrested by the Rwandan Patriotic Front regime the day he arrived in Rwanda to try to defend FDU Inkingi politician Victoria Ingabire, facing political charges by the regime because he had merely repeated publicly what the evidence was at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda about the Rwandan Patriotic Front crimes. He was only released after extensive intervention by other defense counsel and the reluctant intervention of the United States State Department. The Rwandan and Ugandan invasions of the Democratic Republic of the Congo beginning in 1996 created a severe problem for Africa. Year by year, the situation became worse. In 1999, the Democratic Republic of Congo initiated proceedings against Rwanda in the International Court of Justice. That proceeding was later discontinued because of the Congo's expressed belief in their ability to resolve the matter by negotiation. But in 2002, Congo was forced to institute new proceedings against Rwanda because of technical reasons with very questionable argumentation. The ICJ found no jurisdiction in the case, so the Congolese claims stayed unanswered. That is, the International Criminal Justice found no jurisdiction. The attempts by the NATO powers to indict heads of state for actions committed on the territory of foreign countries using the United Nations as their tool have become more and more frequent. But the leaders targeted for this treatment are those who stand in the way of Western interests, never those that bend to Western interests. We can cite as examples the case against Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic for the alleged planning and fueling of the war crimes in Bosnia, that against Liberian President Charles Taylor for his alleged aiding and abetting crimes committed in Sierra Leone, and finally the case against the Vice President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, J.P. Bemba, for the military assistance in CAR. Paul Kagame is an example of an American-supported leader whose crimes go unpunished because he is useful to them and because they are party to his crimes. The prosecutors of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda have wasted 17 years protecting Paul Kagame from his responsibility for the crimes he and his forces committed in Rwanda in 1994. The consequences has been a continuation of those crimes into the Congo, drowning the Great Lakes region of Africa in blood. Since the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda has refused to act on its responsibilities, it is now up to the International Criminal Court to take up the burden and to commence an investigation into the crimes set out in the addendum report and the crimes committed by Paul Kagame and others who support him since 2003, the date on which the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court begins. The impunity given to Kagame and his allies can only come to an end, and with it the wars in the Great Lakes region, when his crimes and those of the powers that support him are exposed and brought to justice. It is not enough to study the consequences of these wars. It is necessary to understand the reasons and the causes for these wars. The August 17th action at The Hague is an attempt to start the long-delayed process of bringing Paul Kagame and his allies to justice. Now, as a note, when we talk about allies, we're talking about Bill Clinton. We're talking about other American operatives who have been in support of Paul Kagame in this murderous trail. Only when this is achieved can Africans begin to create the conditions for the restoration of peace and the conditions necessary to develop Africa's immense potential. The August 17th action should be supported. That is, supported by the International Criminal Court. Again, they're fighting an uphill battle because the International Criminal Court and the judges and prosecutors, most of them, many of them, fear the United States, and some of them are in the pocket of the United States government and intelligence apparatus.